There exists a yellowed letter aged by nearly 500 years kept under the tightest security in the secret archives of the Vatican. It is not a mere piece of paper. Within its fibers are mingled ink tears and tiny dark stains that, according to experts who examined it in secret, could be traces of human blood. That letter should never have been written. It is the confession of a girl barely 14 years old who, on the night history promised to crown her queen, experienced such a brutal ordeal that her innocence was shattered forever. In its place, a shadow hungry for vengeance was born. Its author is Catherine de Medici, a young Florentine who arrived in France as a key piece in a political chess game between kingdoms and popes, convinced that her marriage would mark the beginning of a life of prestige and power. But what awaited her in that bridal chamber was neither love nor ceremony, but a calculated spectacle of humiliation. That night her flesh was wounded, but what was truly violated was her dignity. Amid cruel whispers and hidden laughter, Catherine felt something tear inside her, an invisible thread that connected her heart to the innocence of her childhood. When that thread snapped, it was replaced by a knot of resentment, tight and unbreakable. Documents now brought to light reveal that the night was witnessed from the shadows by 23 people, high-ranking nobles hidden behind slits and secret passages, watching every moment as if attending a macabre theater. None of them could have imagined that in time they would pay the price for their morbid curiosity, for one by one, over the years they would all die poisoned by the same woman whose blood-tinged tears they had seen fall that night. It was later discovered that Catherine kept a hidden diary. Page after page, she wrote the name of each witness, meticulously noting the date, method, and final gasps of every life she took. That wedding night not only made her a wife, but transformed her into a strategist of hatred, capable of turning her pain into the coldest and most calculated revenge. If as you read these words you feel a shiver run down your spine and a forbidden curiosity awaken in your mind, know that you are not alone. Only 1 in 1,000 dares to continue learning until the end of this story. The rest prefer to live deceived by the official history. To understand the scope of that tragedy, we must mentally travel to the 25th of October, 1533, when the Palace of Marseille was adorned with finery and the aromas of a royal feast. Outside, the streets overflowed with music, wine, and onlookers celebrating the union between France and the powerful Medici family. Inside, in the most guarded corridors, a very different scene was being prepared, one that would never appear in official chronicles or ecclesiastical sermons. Documents discovered centuries later in the Vatican archives speak of a secret practice known as the purification ceremony, a medieval tradition that the French court applied only to foreign brides under the pretext of cleansing them of any impurity foreign to royal blood. This ceremony was not recorded in any register. It was passed down orally among the oldest members of the nobility, almost like a vow shared in whispers and goblets of wine. Catherine, having just turned 14, had no idea what awaited her. The young girl walked that night through stone corridors illuminated by torches casting unsettling shadows on the tapestries. Her hands sweated beneath silk gloves, and though her face maintained the serenity taught by the nuns of St. Lucia inside, she felt a faint tremor. She believed she would experience her first intimacy, as any noble bride would, unaware that she was about to face a ritual designed not to unite but to break. In the bridal chamber, Henry of Orleans, barely 15 years old, awaited her. Physically strong but mentally molded, he was entirely under the influence of Diane de Poitiers, his 34-year-old mistress. Diane not only controlled his impulses and decisions, but had meticulously planned every gesture and word of that night, ensuring the humiliation would be complete. Henry, obedient as a puppet, would follow her instructions to the letter. Through secret passages built for unseen spying, 23 members of the French high nobility positioned themselves to witness the scene, peering through hidden slits with eyes gleaming with morbid anticipation. Some sipped their drinks slowly, others murmured bets on how long it would take the young Italian to break. They were not mere witnesses. They were active participants in a cruel tradition that had been secretly repeated for generations. What followed surpassed all imaginable limits. The first caresses were a deception, a trap to lower her guard. Soon, physical and psychological violence took over the room. Catherine screamed in Italian, begging for mercy, but her pleas were drowned out by laughter and comments muffled by the walls. The trauma was so intense that the delicate blood vessels around her eyes burst, causing a rare medical phenomenon hemolacria tears mixed with blood. Henry alternated moments of feigned tenderness with brutal attacks deliberately prolonging her suffering. 3 times during the early hours, the court physician Anand Dubois was called to revive her when she lost consciousness. Each time she opened her eyes, the shadows of the witnesses seemed to draw closer, like vultures circling their prey. When dawn finally broke, the Catherine who had entered that room no longer existed. In her place was something new, a woman who had memorized every face, every voice, and every laugh that echoed in the darkness. A being who in time would turn that humiliation into a deadly weapon against all those present. That gray dawn in Marseille brought no relief but a new form of existence for Catherine de Medici. The girl who had crossed France with timid dreams and youthful hopes was gone. In her place emerged a woman who, though still dressed in silks and lace, carried in her eyes a coldness no court tutor had ever seen before. For days, Catherine barely spoke. She walked through the palace corridors with slow steps, listening, observing, memorizing every detail of the people around her. What no one understood was that her silence was not born of fear, but of calculation. The humiliation she had suffered had crystallized into an unshakable purpose to repay one by one every pain inflicted upon her. The education she received at the convent of St. Lucia took on new meaning. There she had learned Latin philosophy, history, and even the rudiments of alchemical arts practiced in secret by her maternal aunt. From the age of 12, she mastered 5 languages and understood Europe's intricate political networks better than many seasoned diplomats. She had also studied the use of medicinal herbs, infusions, and extracts that could heal or kill. What were once academic pursuits now became tools for a plan she would weave with the patience of a spider. Her husband, Henry of Orleans, barely noticed the change. He remained under the spell of Diane de Poitiers, convinced that Catherine was merely a docile, unambitious wife. But Catherine had learned a crucial lesson: never reveal her true intentions until the moment was perfect. At court, she smiled when she had to accept minor humiliations without protest, and cultivated strategic friendships, all while keeping the map of her vengeance alive in the depths of her mind. In the years that followed, Catherine began to gain influence little by little, using banquet celebrations and audiences to listen to rumors, detect weaknesses, and forge ties with key figures. Meanwhile, in the solitude of her chambers, she kept a secret diary. In it, the name of each of the 23 witnesses to her wedding night was written in black ink, accompanied by precise notes, the gestures they made, the words they spoke, the positions where they hid. It was not a mere record. It was a list of condemnation. To the court's eyes, Catherine remained the young Florentine who had learned to adapt to French customs, but within her grew a silent power, fueled by the memory of pain and the certainty that one day the scales of justice would tip in her favor. And when that moment came, no plea or mercy would stop her. 3 years passed before Catherine made her first move on the board of her revenge. During that time, she had patiently observed, cultivating the image of a compliant, harmless, even fragile wife. But in the privacy of her chambers, every night, she opened her diary, reviewed the names, and refined the methods she would use to erase each of the 23 witnesses to her humiliation. The first name on the list was Jean de Montmorency, an arrogant courtier who on the wedding night had suggested with laughter, betting on how long the young Italian would resist before collapsing. Catherine vividly recalled the glint of cruelty in his eyes, the way he sipped wine while watching her suffering. Now, 3 years later, that memory would become a sentence. The poison Catherine chose was no ordinary one. In the secret laboratory she maintained in one of the palace's least traveled rooms, officially used to store medicinal herbs, she had developed a precise blend of hemlock and mercury, perfected through months of experimentation. This combination caused violent convulsions, pink foam at the mouth, and prolonged agony that could last hours, mirroring the exact symptoms she had endured that night. Jean de Montmorency was found dead in his chambers on a cold winter morning. The court whispered of possible food poisoning, but Catherine knew the truth. Before he drank the fatal cup, he had received a small glass vial containing a dark red liquid and a brief message: "So you remember what you saw." That would become the hallmark of all her revenges, her blood-tinged tears preserved as a symbol and a warning. In the years that followed, the deaths continued, always following the same pattern. The victims were chosen with surgical precision, and no suspicion fell on Catherine. They murmured that an invisible shadow was claiming the lives of nobles one by one. But no one could imagine that this shadow hid behind the calm smile of the queen, weaving a web of death with the patience of one who knows revenge is a dish best served cold. Each murder was for Catherine an act of poetic justice. It was not just about killing, but meticulously recreating the suffering she had experienced. With each name crossed off her diary, she felt she reclaimed a piece of the dignity stolen from her. Among all the names written in Catherine's secret diary, one shone with a distinct hatred: Diane de Poitiers. She was not just a witness, but the intellectual architect of the humiliation. It was she who devised the ritual, who trained Henry of Orleans to execute every gesture and word with cruel precision. Her influence over the young prince and later the king was absolute. Catherine knew that bringing her down would not be an impulsive act, but the masterpiece of her revenge. Unlike her other victims, Diane would not die quickly. Catherine chose a far more subtle and prolonged method: slow, invisible poisoning, nearly impossible to detect. For months, tiny doses of toxic substances were mixed into her food and drink, always in such minute quantities that they raised no suspicion. The poison not only deteriorated her body, but also her mind. Day by day, Diane felt her strength fade. Her reflexes grow sluggish, and her memory begin to fail. Catherine attended every banquet where her enemy was present, watching her drink from her cup with a polite smile, exchanging glances laden with meanings only they understood. It was a silent duel, a game of endurance in which Catherine controlled every move. No one at court suspected anything, for, to all, the king's favorite remained the radiant woman she had been for decades, though her eyes were beginning to lose their sparkle. Finally, at 66 years old, Diane de Poitiers died after drinking a wine offered by Catherine herself. The autopsy, rudimentary for the time, revealed progressive deterioration of her internal organs, as if an invisible poison had worked on them for a long time. Catherine had replicated in her enemy the same prolonged suffering she had endured since her wedding night, but multiplied by years of slow agony. Meanwhile, other victims from the list fell one by one. Some were courtiers who had bet on her endurance that night. Others were women who had participated in her degradation with mockery and venomous comments. All received before the end the same macabre gift: a small glass vial with a dark red liquid in a brief note. It was her signature, a reminder that Catherine never forgot and never forgave. Over time, the palace corridors filled with rumors. They said a blood curse weighed on those who had been present at that forbidden ritual. But the truth was far simpler, and at the same time more terrifying. It was not a curse, but the iron will of a woman who had turned her humiliation into an unstoppable weapon. On Catherine's list, one name always remained at the end: the key piece to crown her revenge, Henry II. Her husband, the man who had executed the humiliation on that wedding night, while the shadows of 23 witnesses loomed on the stone walls. He was no ordinary target. He was the King of France, and his death could not be hasty or common. It had to be symbolic, a perfect closure to more than 2 decades of silent retaliation. On the 10th of July, 1559, Paris celebrated a tournament in honor of the peace signed with Spain. The square was packed with nobles, ladies, and commoners, eager to see the king demonstrate his prowess in the joust. Henry, confident and proud, agreed to face Captain Gabriel de Montgomery in a friendly duel. Catherine, from the royal box, watched with an impassive face, but her eyes followed every movement with a concentration few could decipher. When the lances clashed, a fragment of Montgomery's lance pierced the visor of the royal helmet lodging in the king's eye. The crowd held its breath. Physicians rushed to his aid, but they could not prevent the king, gravely wounded, from lingering between life and death for 10 days. It was a prolonged and painful end, marked by convulsions, fever, and hallucination symptoms that, according to modern analysis, could not be attributed solely to the wound. Recent studies of the lance tip, preserved as a relic, revealed traces of an unknown organic substance possibly applied before the combat, a toxin that would have accelerated the king's deterioration and multiplied his suffering. It could never be proven that Catherine was behind it, but on Henry's tomb appeared a strange symbol: 3 interconnected circles pierced by a vertical line, the same one Catherine had drawn with her own blood on the wall of the bridal chamber that night in 1533. For her, Henry's death was not just the culmination of a plan, but the ultimate liberation. With that final act, she closed a cycle of more than 20 years in which she had turned humiliation into a weapon and pain into absolute power. No witnesses to that night remained alive. All without exception had fallen. Catherine, the young girl who once cried tears of blood, now stood as the most feared woman in the French court. The story of Catherine de Medici might seem on its own one of the most elaborate and ruthless revenges in European history, but the reality is that her case is just one piece in a much larger and more disturbing puzzle. The Vatican's secret archives, opened to the public after 500 years of secrecy, reveal that she was not the only woman of royal blood who transformed humiliation into a lethal weapon. Among the documents are the lost diaries of Mary Tudor, better known as Bloody Mary. What official history describes as a reign marked by bloody executions barely scratches the surface of what her personal writings reveal. Secret rituals, torture practices so refined that public executions seem like acts of mercy in comparison. Her obsession was not just punishment, but meticulous suffering designed to break the will long before death arrived. There are also the coded letters of Elizabeth of Bavaria, known as Elizabeth Buttery, in Latin transcription, describing alchemical experiments with corrosive and narcotic substances that turned her prisoners into subjects of prolonged tests. These experiments, hidden under the guise of medical research, were actually trials to create the perfect method of torture, one that kept the victim alive long enough to extract every secret and every scream possible. And among the most unsettling manuscripts are those of Lucrezia Borgia. Though legend already paints her as a master of poison, recently deciphered texts show formulas of such sophistication that modern scientists have yet to fully replicate them. These were compounds capable of mimicking natural diseases, causing deaths that went unnoticed even by the most experienced physicians of the time. Each of these women, like Catherine, was shaped by pain, betrayal, or abuse, and responded not with submission, but with a power that history tried to silence. And though the names of many of them were erased from chronicles and official portraits, their traces remain hidden in the darkest basements of European archives, waiting for someone brave enough to bring them to light. If this story has ignited in you the same thirst for truth as it has in us, know that what we've told today is only a fraction of what lies behind the velvet curtains and stone walls of medieval royalty. There are secrets that once heard cannot be forgotten, and others that perhaps we should never uncover. Tell me in the comments which other queen or historical figure you want us to investigate. Your choice will decide which forbidden secrets we reveal in the next episode. Because if Catherine's story seemed dark to you, what comes next will make it seem like a mere children's tale.